Well, good afternoon and welcome to Crown and Central Agency meeting. I'd like to welcome the members of the committee. I'm Fred Bradshaw, the chair. With us, we also have Lisa Lambert, Hugh Nerleen, and Warren McCall is the deputy chair. We have a very busy meeting today. This afternoon, the committee will be considering the estimates for the Public Service Commission, Sask Gaming, and SaskTel. This evening, we will be considering the estimates for Sask Energy, 3 bills, and the remaining estimates before the committee. Let us begin our consideration of Vote 33, Public Service Commission, Central Management and Services Subvote PS01. Minister Shuttledayoff, would you please introduce your officials and make your opening comments?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Pleased to be here to undertake the estimates for the Public Service Commission. I will take this opportunity to make some brief opening comments. I'm pleased to provide additional information as required by questioning. Before I start, I would like to take a minute to introduce my officials that are here with me today. I have Karen Ollie to my left, who is the chair of the Public Service Commission. Ray Deck, the assistant chair. Give us a wave. Scott Kistner, executive director of the Human Resources Services Center. Glenda Francis is here, and she's the executive director of corporate services. Lorraine Von Hagen, is she here? No, she didn't make it. And Michael Kondrachek, my chief of staff, is here as well. The Public Service Commission, or PSC, is a central agency for government providing human resource services for executive government, as well as some agencies, boards, and commissions. We help ministries ensure that they have the right human resources in place to help government deliver on its objectives. Currently, there are more than 11,000 employees who work for the government of Saskatchewan. These employees work in various roles all over the province. As a central agency, the government, the PSC provides strategic support for labor relations, organizational development, employee recruitment and development, compensation and classification, health and safety. It also supports foundational services, including payroll and benefits. PSC has HR business partner teams embedded within ministries to serve their HR needs. This recognizes the unique business that each ministry is in and ensures that their human resource professionals are fully integrated in their business, helping them to make the best possible decisions. Our employees provide strategic support and outstanding service and are respected as valuable resources to ministry clients. In the past year, PSC has made significant progress on many of our strategic initiatives. Inclusion and diversity are a priority for our government. Under the area of inclusion, we continue to implement government's inclusion strategy and action plan. Last fall, we launched the Inclusion Toolkit. This toolkit provides practical tools for managers to use to help them develop an inclusive workplace and hire a diverse workforce. This multimedia toolkit includes a Getting Started section that launched in October and an Acquire, Engage, and Grow section that launched this past April. Tools include 2 new e-learning modules, videos, articles, and templates, dialogue starters, and presentations to help managers and their employees learn about and support inclusion. In addition to the toolkit, PSC launched a government-wide inclusion community of practice this year. This group is made up of leaders from each of the ministry's inclusion committees. These employees are dedicated to leading inclusion work within their ministries. They come together to share information and inform inclusion priorities across government. In the area of diversity, in July of 2018, the PSC launched an online portal through PSC Client to allow employees to self-declare in a diversity category at any time. This initiative is helping us more accurately reflect our diversity numbers and allow diversity employees to self-identify for training and development opportunities. These initiatives, along with several other training and learning initiatives, are slowly helping to increase government diversity and representation. Although we still fall short of most of the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission's targets, particularly the disability target that was recently increased, we are making progress. In 2019-2020, government representation of diversity group members has slightly increased in all categories except the Aboriginal people category. The decrease in Aboriginal representation is related to the move of Environment's wildfire branch out of executive government to the Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency. In the area of health, safety, and wellness, the Public Service Commission is investing in the health, safety, and wellness of employees as part of its corporate health and safety plan and healthy workplace initiative. Last year, the PSC transitions its employee and family assistance program counseling services to a third-party vendor, Morneau Chapelle. This change has improved service to employees by providing online counseling, interactive resources, and self-help tools with a 24/7 service availability. It also provides additional support and resources for managers to help them create psychologically safe workplaces. The transition of EFAP service has allowed the PSC to focus more on proactive psychological health and safety programming to better support ministries. On the safety side, PSC launched a new incident reporting and investigation application in PSC Client. The IRI app, as it's known, has a number of benefits for government. There'll be a test on the acronyms later. The app streamlines the reporting of safety incidents in their near misses, making it entirely digital and available on any device. It also dramatically improves our reporting abilities and analytics so we can identify where to target our safety improvements. Since the launch in January, more than 700 incidents have been reported through the IRI app, nearly eliminating manual entry of the paper form. These accomplishments show that we are on the right track and have contributed to significant reductions in government injury rates. In the strategic plan, the PSC's strategic plan for 2020-2021 is consistent with previous years. The 5 areas of strategic priority remain the same. They are effective leadership, high-performing organization, inclusive workforce, health, safety, and wellness, and an engaged, high-performing public service commission. We believe we have captured the strategic HR priorities of government in these areas. Our first area of focus, effective leadership, is about ensuring the government of Saskatchewan has the leadership required to deliver on its commitments. This includes acquiring leadership capacity through proactive and targeted leadership and recruitment. It also includes enhancing our performance management system, strengthening leadership succession, and ensuring senior leadership has knowledge and tools necessary to acquire, engage, and grow employees. The second area of focus is the high-performing organization. It includes proactive and targeted recruitment for pivotal and hard-to-recruit positions, developing a competency-based career progression system, and implementing the multi-year learning and development strategy for government. We will continue to build on our corporate culture, guided by our commitment to excellence. The goal is to have engaged and productive employees who are valued and appreciated. Enterprise Business Modernization Project, we are working to make improvements to our technology. Technology not only improves processes, it also allows for better information that is more accurate and available quicker, which allows for better decision making. PSC is partnering with the Ministry of Finance, Central Services, Highways and Infrastructure, and Sask Builds to implement a new enterprise solution for an integrated financial, human resource, and procurement system. This system will increase efficiency, generate significant financial savings, and drive better business outcomes and evidence-based decisions. I know our time is limited and my notes go on a little bit longer, but I'm just going to maybe cut them off there and allow the member to have as much time as possible to ask questions. I know our time is very limited here today.
Well, thank you, Minister. Mr. McCall, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Minister, Madam Chair, officials, and thanks for the generous cutting off of the remarks. I'm sure the scintillation wouldn't have varied in the slightest, but thank you for the consideration. I guess the first place to start would be, you know, where we are in these times, and could the minister or the chair or officials give us some sort of big picture view of what's happening with the public service as relates to COVID, in terms of who's working at home, what sort of accommodations have been made, what sort of impacts have been made on those incomes. You know, please feel free to tell us all about it.
Thanks very much to the member for the very important question at this time, and certainly the rapid response to the onset of the COVID pandemic was a tremendous responsibility for the Public Service Commission and Central Services and others as well. So I was very, very pleased to see the rapid action that took place and the accommodation for as many employees as possible. We continue to have a number of frontline ministries where people continued through the number of months to do their jobs hands-on, if you like. Areas like highways, for example, corrections and public safety, social services. Many were not able to have different accommodations, so they remain frontline, and we thank those frontline workers as we thank the frontline workers in healthcare. Each ministry had those that were involved. We were able to accommodate in other ministries up to 95% of those employees that were able to work from home, and we transitioned them, and we're very, very pleased. We've learned a lot in ourselves in the process, but the technology that was available was very helpful, and basically employees were able to take hardware home and access the government network, and through applications like Microsoft Teams and others were able to continue to do their work and continue the productivity that is needed as well. It's one thing to have people working from home, but you need that productivity as well, and we're very pleased to say that what we found was that productivity was there. So here we are in late June, and starting last week, we started a process to bring those individuals back into their workplace. First of all, preparing the workplace so they can safely work from that area, and then looking at staggering individuals and making accommodation. This process will last through the summer into about the third week in August, where we, by that time, expect to have the vast majority of our workers back in their workplace.
Well, thank you very much for that, Mr. Minister, and certainly you're absolutely correct. We have big expectations for our public service at the best of times, and this certainly wasn't the best of times by any measure, but I'm glad but not surprised to hear the Minister's remarks about productivity not flagging and the people digging in to make sure that the job still got done. So thanks for that, Mr. Minister. In terms of there's no discernible impact on payroll. Paychecks kept flowing, the work kept getting done, and I guess in terms of how that fits into the budget overall, as we're here today to talk about the estimates, is there any sort of contemplation of the future in terms of this is a pretty much steady as it goes kind of budget for the Public Service Commission? I'd be interested to know if there are any collective bargaining agreements that the PSC is aiding in the negotiation of, outstanding. But in terms of what happens post this budget with the zeros that the finance minister has indicated are firmly on the table for the foreseeable future. Is there any sort of additional information to be added on that front in terms of work sharing, furloughs? I'll not get into trouble using the minister's formal name, but of course we've been around long enough to have seen those discussions and different options that were being contemplated by the government around how to make payroll and how to make the budget work. So what's the go forward, Mr. Minister, after this budget and when the government starts tying into the fiscal situation at hand?
I heard the member trying to explain several days off and things like that, but we have some fun with that. When your name is Cheval Day Off and you're minister in charge of the Public Service Commission and wanting to make sure that people don't take those days off. What we're doing here is ensuring that we are capturing all the learnings that we have gained over the last number of months to help guide us into the future. And I think part of that, it's fair to say that we're developing a remote workforce policy as well for the longer term and we don't know exactly how that will roll out yet, but I think there is an option there for some people to work from home in the long-term future. So that's an area of interest to me, and I look forward to what the officials have learned and hearing more about that in the future. We didn't go in through any period of layoffs. We felt it very important to keep as many people working as possible in light of the economic situation around COVID as well. But in order to do that, the work has to be there, and in fact the work has increased if anything, and so we were able to do that. We did hold back a bit on our summer student acquisitions and hirings this summer, probably 200 less than other years, but we just felt that necessary. And of course, when you have a summer student, you want to make sure that they're busy and being able to be put in the right place. So that number has seemed to work with us. Remember us also about the collective bargaining. We have no outstanding tables at this time. The last one that was settled was the QP agreement, and that was 0, 0, 1, 2, and 2. So basically 5% over 5 years. And in light of the economic situation, I think it was very fair, and many of the agreements mirror that to a large extent that we have been able to sign.
Thanks for that, Mr. Minister. In terms of the summer students, and I appreciate that you don't want to bring summer students into situations that are not productive, or if the work is not there, or if there's some kind of risk imposed or posed for the individual's health. That's certainly fair enough. But is the Public Service Commission in conjunction with, I think of the CIC, and certainly the minister, as a former CIC minister, is familiar with GradWorks, a program that was wrapped up just this past year. It would seem to me that in terms of internships, in terms of work placements, in terms of summer students in the go forward, those are some pretty precious opportunities that our students are going to be looking for with, I would imagine, increased anxiety. Is there any plan underway, either with the Public Service Commission or that the Public Service Commission is part of throughout the whole of government to really look at that part of the labor market and what can be done to match, the public service has always got hiring needs as far as I can tell. And so matching up that labor market potential with that labor market need in a time where that's all the more urgent. Is there anything underway in that regard?
Thank you very much. The member touched on many priorities of the Public Service Commission, and certainly keeping as many young people interested in a career in the public service is something that we try to do. And the reason that there was a decrease this year is many of the students, we would have had to bring them on and then had them immediately working remotely, and it just wasn't practical. So we're talking a number of about 200 students, but we fully expect that we'll be back to a full complement, providing we're able to, and we get past the COVID situation next year. We continue to have a number of internships. The Edwards School of Business in Saskatoon has a partnership with the Public Service Commission where they're a co-op situation, if you like, and also the Johnson Shoyama here as well. We have partnerships there. We also have a lot of practicums that are taking place, in ministries like social services, for example. There's a high complement of practicums that take place. And this is really important, and I'm sure a member in his research has seen this, but we look at a high turnover rate in the next number of years. 34% over the next 3 years, possibly as high as that, as far as people retiring and the need for young people to enter the workforce. So that's going to be a challenge and an opportunity, but we look forward to that. And it's always great to have that young and enthusiastic aspect of bringing on students into the ministries.
Well, thanks for that, Mr. Minister. And again, I appreciate this is always part of the day-to-day business of the Public Service Commission in terms of planning the future. But as the Minister notes, we have a tremendous opportunity here that aligns very well with a tremendous need that is there on the part of a lot of young people across this province. So. And again, far be it from me to, tell the government its business, but I think this a program that took a really targeted approach and ramped up the efforts that are underway with the government, I think would be very well received by the people of Saskatchewan, and for very good reason. Anyway, it's I'll leave that with the minister, and I'll be looking for the good work to come to fruition on this score. But certainly, again, this is not the time to be wrapping up something like RadWorks, and I'll not get into that into any great extent. But
the decision was made a number of years ago, right?
And decisions can be made again. And as circumstances change, government responds. So, there's a lot of infrastructure that's still there. So I'll leave it at that. But, thanks for taking note, Mr. Minister. In terms of the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action in the cultural awareness training that has been undertaken with the Public Service Commission as a whole, could the Minister provide an update as to progress on that front for the committee?
Thanks very much for the question, a very important question, and certainly something we take very seriously with the Public Service Commission. Call to action number 57 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission says, we call upon the federal, provincial, and territorial municipal governments to provide education to public servants on the history of Aboriginal peoples, including the history and legacy of residential schools, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, treaties and Aboriginal rights, Indigenous law, and Aboriginal Crown relations. This will require skills-based training in intercultural competency, conflict resolution, human rights, and anti-racism. So this was the area that directly applied to the Public Service Commission. The undertaking by the Saskatchewan government was to have 20% of employees complete this training per year over a 5-year period. And we are in a position here that we are meeting that goal as of March 31st, 2020. There have been 4,051 employees who completed the Aboriginal awareness training, which represents approximately 38% of government employees. So I think that that's something that we can all be proud of. That recommendation was not only looked at seriously but acted upon, and we're well on our way to enhancing that education and the tools that are available for public servants as they deal with First Nations individuals and welcome them as colleagues in the public service as well.
Has there been any participation on the part of the Public Service Commission leadership in the awareness training? And I know you're all busy people, but just what's the status of that?
Thanks very much for the question again, and I'm told that virtually all of the senior leadership have completed the training.
Good. Yourself, Mr. Minister?
Minister of First Nations and Métis Relations, and I had an opportunity to do that very early on, and again, found it quite valuable.
All right. And just if I could, who's the provider? What constitutes the training?
Aboriginal Consulting Services, ACS, is a preferred vendor to deliver Aboriginal awareness training. It's a 5-year master agreement with terms and conditions contract to expire at the end of January in 2022. Ministries include Aboriginal awareness training as part of their ongoing learning and developing offerings, and some ministries, including health, corrections, policing, and social services, have developed additional training that meets specific needs of their ministry roles. So.
Thanks for that. Seeing by the clock on the wall that the time is coming up, I do want to just get the minister on the record in terms of the significant gap in terms of representative workforce, and you'd referenced it in your opening comments, but in terms of the place of disabled people in the Public Service Commission of Saskatchewan, is there any sort of immediate plan to try and get those numbers in a better place?
For the committee's information, we are very proud of the numbers that they do have when we come to the equity targets and the situation. We've increased over the last year substantially in the neighborhood of 40%, if I recall correctly. But again, the numbers are nowhere near what the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission would like to see us at. And in fact, they increased their target numbers from 12.4% to 22.2%. And, it's something that I've had a chance to talk to the Human Rights Commissioner about, and I just think it's almost impossible to reach some of those targets. But what we are doing is allowing individuals to self-declare, and we are indeed making every effort possible to include individuals in less advantaged situations to be able to become part of the public service. The disability was defined as a limitation in daily activities impacting participation and inclusion in society, as opposed to a functional health issue and or recognition of environment, which exponentially increased the response rate to experiencing a disability. So indeed, we are working in that regard, and as we say, there's more work to do. But if I may also put in a plug for my other responsibility in central services, we're working very closely with the Rick Hansen Foundation to ensure that all of our buildings are accessible. First, they'll be analyzed, and then ensure that the changes are put in place if needed. And some of our newer buildings, Mosaic Stadium, for example, won an award from the foundation for its accessibility. So I think if there is a willingness on behalf of senior leadership to work in this regard, and we make it as easy as possible, we're going to see some positive results in the future. But again, the human rights, Saskatchewan human rights targets are very, very difficult to reach.
Well, thanks for that, Mr. Minister. And before my colleagues start giving me the hook, I'll just say thanks very much. And to you, to the officials, and through you to the men and women of the public service of Saskatchewan, a huge thank you for all the work that is done. Not just in the good times, but in these times we find ourselves. So, thank you very much, Mr. Minister, and I'm sure we'll see you down the road.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. If I may very briefly just thank the member and thank him for our interactions over the years. They've been very respectful. I know the work that goes into preparing for estimates and the questions that are put forward. And I wish the member well in his future endeavors. And I must say he has served well in this legislative chamber.
Well, thank you. Seeing that we've reached agreed upon time for questioning, we will now vote off the estimates for the Public Service Commission. Vote 33, Public Service Commission, Central Management and Services Subvote PS01 in the amount of $5,060,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Human Resource Consulting Services Subvote PS03 in the amount of $8,888,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Employee Relations and Strategic Human Resource Services Subvote PS04 in the amount of $7,879,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Human Resource Service Center Subvote PS06 in the amount of $13,390,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Non-appropriated expense adjustment in the amount of $305,000. Non-appropriated expense adjustments are non-cash adjustments presented for informational purposes only. No amount is to be voted. Public Service Commission, vote 33, $35,217,000. I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolve that there be granted to Her Majesty for 12 months ending March 31st, 2021, the following sums for Public Service Commission in the amount of $35,217,000. Ms. Lambert has so moved. Is that agreed? Carried. We will now take a recess to allow the officials from Saskatoon to come in. Well, welcome back, committee members. We'll now begin our consideration with vote 139, Saskatchewan Gaming Corporation, loans sub-vote GC01. Minister Tell, please introduce your officials and make your opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce the officials. On my right is Susan Flett, President and CEO. Behind me, right there, is Blaine Polatsky, Vice President of Corporate Services, and directly behind us is John Admonson, Senior Vice President of Finance and IT. Of course, Shanna Schulhauser, Director of Communications, and my Chief of Staff, Braden Fox. The last time SAS Gaming appeared before this committee was to consider the 2018-19 annual report. Seeing as that information is on the official record, I'll focus my comments on more recent developments. At the end of Gaming Day on March 16th, 2020, SAS Gaming temporarily closed casinos Regina and Moose Jaw as a result of COVID-19 pandemic. This was done with the guidance and assistance of public health officials. It was the right decision and one that was consistent with all other provincial jurisdictions. This resulted in the corporation not turning a profit in over 3 months. As you can imagine, zero profit has implications across the board. It has meant a net loss of about $4 million and a decline from budget of about $7.5 million for each month the casinos remain temporarily closed. It has meant no transfers to the GRF to support government programs and services for the first quarter of 2021 fiscal year. It has impacted the corporation's community giving program, which endows approximately 1% of profit to local organizations, events, and programs. It has resulted in SAS Gaming shareholders, the Crown Investments Corporation, canceling its 2019-20 Q4 dividend and special dividend payments. Further to this, the corporation made the difficult decision to temporarily lay off 549 permanent employees effective April 3rd of 2020. These layoffs were made under public emergency provisions in the amended Saskatchewan Employment Act. Employees who were temporarily laid off can return to their home positions at the end of the temporary closure. This has allowed for job security, the continuation of employee benefits, and the ability to access government programs such as Canada Emergency Response Benefit. Despite the challenges of COVID-19, the corporation has made considerable headway in other areas of business. In May of 2020, SAS Gaming and RWDSU Casino Regina and RWDSU Casino Moose Jaw bargaining units reached settlements. These settlements were put to a vote, and RWDSU will have the results on June 30th of this year. If approved, all SAS Gaming bargaining units will have new collective agreements. In order to help support the local economy, construction industry, and of course the sub-trades, SAS Gaming continues to chip away at the refresh of its casino properties. Renovations are now complete on the last Spike restaurant, and this summer renovations will begin in the east area of Casino Regina. The corporation expects all renovations at Casino Regina to be completed by early 2023, at which point casinos at Casino Moose Jaw will commence. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening remarks, and I'll now turn it over to the member for Regina Elphinstone and invite questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Minister. Any questions, Mr. McCall?
One or two, Mr. Chair. Thanks very much. Madam Minister, officials, good to see you. And it's you know, the strange, unprecedented nature of these times gets batted around an awful lot these days. But nowhere is that more true than for the hardworking men and women at Casinos Regina and Moose Jaw. And to say that they've been through, you have been through some wrenching times is is hard to do it justice. So I guess I'd start off at the very beginning and say, you know, our thoughts are with the workers and the leadership, and I know for my own self and the constituency I represent, there are a great number of people that gain their livelihoods at the Casino Regina, and the impact that has had on their families, on their home tables is significant. So I guess I appreciate the information as regards the sort of bigger macro financial impacts as relates to the dividend and to the GRF and how that all works. But I guess further to that, if the minister or officials could provide further information as to what's their sense of the coverage from the federal CERB program. Have the workers been made whole? How many were kept on in terms of the skeleton staff to carry on the renovations the minister has referenced, and just to make sure that the operations are ready to come back to life when the time warrants? I'd appreciate that.
So thank you for those comments. Yeah, we obviously had to make that very difficult decision to temporarily lay off 549 of our employees, and these were positions that were directly tied to the service of guests or the operations of the casino. And, you know, we really took the view that through no fault of their own and due to COVID, we've had to lay them off. And so throughout this whole process, what we've tried to do is, you know, ensure that we provide as much support as possible and try to minimize any hardships that we knew that they were going to be going through. And so one of the first things we did was, you know, despite being closed, we continued paying full salaries to all of the employees for an additional 2 weeks. And it was during this time that we were hopeful that there would be an announcement of some sort of federal funding, and there was. It was the CERB. And so without really a break, our employees were able to take advantage of that immediately. Some of the things that we did was, you know, things like sending record of employments directly to Service Canada just to help facilitate the process during this time. And we continue to do so, is we have provided full benefits coverage, group benefits coverage during this time, including things like the family assistance programs, so that, you know, any counseling or mental health supports that may be required are there. We you know, set up employee phone lines. I mean, we are in constant communication with employees using various mediums on all of the continuing supports that became available through the federal program, whether it be, you know, mortgage deferral or whether it be, you know, loan payment deferrals, things like that. So, you know, when we do reopen, we certainly have positions for all of the employees. And there were a lot of part-time and casual employees who, if they were able to take advantage of CERB, likely are getting paid more through that $2,000 a month. So, yeah, we were very happy at the sort of the timing of the federal support. So the second part of your question was the remaining employees. And we have 156 employees that remain despite closure. and about 1/3 were unionized employees. So these were predominantly positions in facilities. We need to continue maintenance of our properties. We had security and surveillance positions because we still need to protect our assets, our properties, and we had surveillance, continue to have surveillance 24/7. We had technicians. We were servicing machines. We were doing upgrades and things that we could do behind the scenes, despite being closed. We also had about that 156, 2/3 are non-unionized employees, and of course these are, areas, payroll, finance, IT. I mean, we continue to operate the corporate side of the business. We have board and, shareholder reporting requirements, and we have elements of our business plan for the upcoming year that still could be executed. And then, of course, the biggest thing has been all the work on the business resumption for when we will eventually be allowed to open.
Well, you've nicely anticipated my next question, which is in terms of, I guess, on the 549 who've been laid off, what's the sense in terms of the intention to return? Are you going to be able to, are they heading off to different work, or is that cohort going to be largely intact and ready to move back into the casinos Regina and Moose Jaw when the situation warrants? What's your sense of that? And then I guess we'll get into what's the sort of scan of the immediate future.
So, as you know, our reopening plan will be a part of Phase 4, Part 2, and we're still awaiting some further direction and guidance. We do have a business resumption plan ready to go, and of course with modifications. If there are any changes as per the Reopen Saskatchewan plan or any new directives from the Chief Medical Officer. But when we reopen, we are making the assumption that it will have to be a phased approach. I believe that we will be operating at reduced capacity, and I'm unsure for how long until we're just going to adapt with the evolving situation of COVID in the province. But when we do reopen, of course, we will be prepared with being able to comply with any, social distancing requirements. I fully expect that there will be some sort of maximum capacity restraint that will likely be imposed. We've ordered and are prepared with the use of any protective personal equipment and cleaning protocols, both in terms of frequency, increasing the frequency, as well as sanitization of high touch surface areas. One of the things that we have done is worked collaboratively with all 4 of our bargaining units to try and identify any potential hazards and, together find solutions to try and minimize any risks upon reopening, both, to all of our employees as well as our guests.
In terms of, and I know that with the gaming industry, there's a lot of sharing of information that goes on, and it's quite a interconnected endeavor. Throughout Canada, are there any jurisdictions that you look to as a comparator, both in terms of the phasing, the reopening, and to learn lessons from experience elsewhere, but also in terms of, I'm sure, watching what's going on in the United States of America and some of the reopening efforts that have gone on there and how they've gone on quite badly. What sort of lessons are to be learned from the environment scan that goes within Canada and then as per the United States?
We actually are a part of an interjurisdictional working group, and so there's a representative from each province in Canada. We conference call frequently to share ideas, immediately after closure, as well as how we're going to handle during closure, and we continue talking prior to opening. And we obviously are keeping an eye on what's been happening in the States. And one of the lessons, the biggest lesson, is just not opening prematurely and really ensuring that we are ready to open and that we can guarantee the safety of guests and our employees at the time that we are ready to open. One of the nice things with not being, the first, we were the first to close, we likely will be one of the last to reopen. We obviously want to be very prudent, and the nice thing with Alberta and Manitoba, some of the jurisdictions that are ahead of us, we will have the benefit of learning from them.
Okay. In terms of the finances, I know we're here for consideration of $5 million. What if the minister or officials could talk a little bit more about how the corporation gets made whole, or if there's anything the minister would like to add, or feel free. But in terms of the $5 million under consideration here today, and then of course the other side of the ledger with what's happened with the dividend and on, if you could just, what's will there be a requirement for supplementary estimates in the fall if this carries on another month, or is what are the projections in terms of revenues and customers as regards to the phased reopening? Because of course, it's down to casinos and bingo in terms of large-scale operations yet to come under Saskatchewan Reopen Plan. So I guess how long can you go with these with cash on hand before you have to come back for more to keep the ball rolling?
Okay. So our cash flow will keep us, our available cash flow will keep us going till probably sometime mid-August if we haven't reopened. If we reopen in July, we feel that the cash flow that we have will maintain operations. We will require cash upon reopening. We're going to need about $6 million to continue with our capital projects, and we'll need another $4 million to ensure liquidity for the gaming floor. So there will be, and we are in talks with our owner, CIC, with how we get that. It will be either through borrowing or through an equity injection by CIC.
But that is not covered off by the funds under consideration here today?
No, that's not. The funds under consideration, the $5 million, that was for payment of the special dividend. That was subsequently canceled. So we repurposed that borrowing to continue on with our operations while we're closed.
Thank you for that, and good work on the podium. Nicely done. The time is slipping away, and I guess in terms of the reopen plan and what's, I don't have a crystal ball, and if I did, I don't know if I'd be offering it up for loaning. It'd be, fully subscribed. But in terms of what is to come and the go forward, this does allow opportunity for reflection and ways to redouble efforts on certain fronts of the operations mission, or for a person, or any of that. So one thing that we've talked a lot about over the years is the committing to the 50% First Nations and Métis complement of Saskatchewan Gaming Corporation employees. Will there be a commitment coming from this time of reflection and consideration of what's the go forward And will there be more of a plan laid out to make that happen when the corporation is back up and running?
Blaine Pulatsky. Would you like me to spell my name, or is that okay? It's okay, good, thank you. I forget I don't appear very often. Thank you for the question. So we are and we continue to be committed towards the long-term achievement of the 50% Indigenous representation goal. And in fact, in 18, 19, I think we spoke about this when we voted off, or when you voted off the previous annual report about we redeveloped, or if you will, or refreshed our Indigenous employment strategy. This was essentially 1920 was essentially the second year of that, and we undertook a number of initiatives around that. We have earmarked a number of things for 2021 as well. We're going to continue to move towards that. We are committed to it. I mean, even during this interim period of being shut down, we've done quite a bit of work around our Indigenous employment strategy, in particular around wellness. We see that as key in terms of retaining our employees and trying to ensure that our Indigenous employees, as well as others, have those necessary supports to be successful in the workplace and to remain in the workplace. And so we continue to do that work. We've undertaken the development of a reconciliation framework that we'll be presenting for approval to the executive group. We truly believe that SAS Gaming has been a leader in economic reconciliation for many, many years in terms of our employment of Indigenous people, and recognizing that there's still work to do with respect to the 50%, but we continue to move towards that 50%.
Thanks for that. And again, we'll be watching with great interest how that proceeds. I guess the chair tells me I've got another 50 minutes to go on so I don't know if that. He's a bit of a jokester though, so I don't know if it's if he's pulling my leg or what. But I guess one last other question in terms of the relationship of the Saskatchewan Gaming Corporation to the Gaming Framework Agreement generally. And again, this is more properly the domain of the SLGA and the emergency payment that was made to keep that somewhat whole. How's that in terms of gaming in Saskatchewan and the relationship with SIGA and the GFA? Any sort of general comments on the state of affairs out through the gaming landscape in Saskatchewan?
You know, when you asked about the First Nations, or the gaming framework agreement, our obligation under the gaming framework agreement is of course to try and work toward and achieve the 50% right of Indigenous employees that work at SAS Gaming. But where we come into this with respect to the first, it's applicable here is the First Nations Trust and the Community Initiatives Fund. And that's that money that was announced by the government. I think it was, let's see how much it was. $50 million in emergency funding to cover off our responsibilities under the Community Initiatives Fund and the First Nations Trust. And the Clarence Campo Development Fund, of course, is all part of that. So as it stands today, what we inject into those particular areas is whole.
When does that become limited or stale dated? When does that run out? When will there be another injection of cash required?
I guess it will be, determined as it goes when, and if we reopen, depending on when we reopen, those types of things. As you said, there's no crystal ball here, and we're just playing it as it goes, anticipating certain things, and making sure that people remain as whole as we possibly can. And that's not always 100% possible because the money's not coming in. But that emergency funds, I'm reasonably hopeful that it will get us to the point, to that point when we actually reopen and start bringing in the money again. Yeah.
With that, thank you very much, Madam Minister, officials.
I was settling
All the best. Fred, he gives and then he takes away. It's a capricious chair. But anyway, thank you very much.
I just want to take this opportunity to wish Mr. McCall all the very best, and I know you'll be speaking in the House, and which is awesome. I'll look forward to hearing you. And it's been a pleasure being with you here at this committee over the years, and I'm sure your future looks bright, and I think you're going to have a really good time. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, Madam Minister, and certainly I think I recall meeting you at a table in a different room in this place. It seems like just a few short years ago. But thank you for all the great interactions we've had over the years, and all the best down the road.
Okay, we will conclude our consideration of SAS Gaming Corporation. Vote 139, Saskatchewan Gaming Corporation, statutory. Votes, loans subvote GC01 in the amount of $15 million. There is no vote as this is statutory. We will now have a recess to bring in the officials from SaskTel. We will now begin our consideration of the main and supplementary lending and investing activities for Vote 153, Saskatchewan Telecommunication Holding Corporation, loans, sub-vote ST01. Minister Morgan, could you please introduce your officials and make your opening comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm pleased to be here today on behalf of SaskTel and the Government of Saskatchewan to discuss the estimates for SaskTel. Prior to my opening remarks, I would just like to introduce the officials from SaskTel who have joined us today. With me today are Doug Burnett, President and CEO, Charlene Gavel, Chief Financial Officer, and Darcy McFarlane, Vice President, Corporate and Government Relations, Michelle Englot, Director of External Communications, and from my office within the building is Wallace Maldman. Mr. Chair, I want to begin with some brief comments regarding SaskTel's 2019-20 fiscal year. Throughout the year, SaskTel invested approximately $263 million in capital improvements across the province to prepare its networks for future demand and to deliver a quality user experience for the people of Saskatchewan. SaskTel continues to invest in and enhance its wireless broadband networks to bring wireless broadband and better cellular coverage to rural areas. Since 2018, SaskTel has built new small cell sites in 103 communities, some with populations as low as 50 people. In addition, SaskTel continued to modernize its digital subscriber line DSL network to enable significant speed upgrades in 260 communities. As of March 31st, SaskTel boasts a wireline network that reaches nearly twice as many communities as its next closest competitor, offering internet services in a total of 459 communities, with 319 of those having speeds of 50 megabytes per second or faster. In terms of other initiatives, SaskTel also continued to expand its fiber service to new neighborhoods in the major centres and beyond, including Emerald Park, Martensville, Melfort, Warman, and White City. During the past fiscal year, 16,000 homes were passed with fiber, and 16,000 customers were connected to Infinet with speeds of up to 300 megabytes per second. Another important driver at SaskTel is to improve access to their top-of-the-line entertainment services. In 2019-20, they expanded Max TV stream service to 350 communities throughout the province and added 28 new channels to the service. Finally, I'd like to touch on SaskTel's contributions to keeping the province connected during the COVID-19 pandemic. SaskTel was pleased to provide some relief to its customers, and SaskTel employees worked hard to maintain essential communication services. Beginning in mid-March through to Phase 3 of Reopen Saskatchewan, SaskTel waived data overage charges for customers on postpaid wireless plans, no strings prepaid wireless plans, and Fusion Internet plans. SaskTel also provided free content to residential Max TV and Max TV Stream customers to help keep them informed and their families entertained. SaskTel's strategic priorities place their customers at the center of everything they do, with the goal of providing exceptional customer service at every touchpoint. With a focus on building advanced and comprehensive broadband networks throughout Saskatchewan and transforming the company to embrace new digital capabilities, all with the goal of making it easier for customers to do business with the company and for employees to serve customers. With further investments put forward in this year's budget, SaskTel will continue to meet and exceed the communications needs of Saskatchewan people. Mr. Chair, that concludes my opening remarks, and I look forward to questions.
Well, thank you, Minister. Are there any questions? Mr. McCall.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Mr. Minister, officials. Welcome to the consideration of these estimates for Saskatchewan Telecommunications Holding Corporation. Always a highlight of my estimate dance card. Although I don't know if I heard the minister correctly at the start, but I think he misidentified one of his staffers, and I don't know if he wants to take the opportunity to apologize to that staffer at this point, or perhaps we can do that in the wrap-up at the end, but nice to see you today as well, Molly.
If I have made a mistake, I'll consider over the estimates whether I wish to correct it or make it worse.
Well, it's always nice to have options, certainly. Mr. Minister, in terms of, if you could just give us a nice round figure in terms of what's happened in terms of what was estimated last year for borrowing for the corporation, and then what's happened in the course of supplementary estimates, and then the main estimate that we're here to consider today.
Sure, I'll let, I'm not sure whether Doug or Charlene is going to do that. I think you'll be aware that we made considerable additional investment in further cell tower coverage and added a large number of towers across the province. Some of that will show up in these statements.
So I'm in the estimates book on page 147, and this is the schedule of non-budgetary voted and statutory appropriation. So for, are you asking for 2021, our estimates? So we have budgeted to borrow $339,900,000. $250 million of that will be long-term debt, and the remaining 89.9 will be short-term debt.
Thanks for that. In terms of supplementary estimates, I've got a lot of paper here, and some of it gets a little, unless Stacy, gets me on the path. But that summarizes the borrowing requirements for the corporation for the year to come. In terms of the measures that the minister had outlined, again, which were greatly appreciated by the people of Saskatchewan, and I think was exactly the kind of thing that you want to see from a Crown corporation like SaskTel in a time of crisis for the province and indeed the globe. What was the price tag in terms of the different measures that the minister enumerated off the top?
Are you asking about the COVID impacts?
Yes.
So we're still determining what those might be. It's very hard to predict what's going to happen with COVID and the impact on some of the revenues and costs. In terms of waiving data overage fees, that was probably in the realm of about $600,000 a month, but, depending on activity and things like that, it can fluctuate. So we're still assessing the impact of all of these things as we progress throughout the year.
Was there...
Probably lost revenue when the pandemic hit. People weren't going out buying new cell phones, so there was a loss of revenue that may come back fairly aggressively post pandemic. So there was a loss at the retail level, and then there was issues whether the customer retention was going to be there throughout. And I think the assessment of the corporation, and I'll let the officials, as to whether they lost customers because of the service, but there was nobody else was providing any better or any different customer. We were all in the same challenges. So there was certainly a loss or a reduction in the number of sales, and then I don't know whether there was an uptake on additional services being used by people that were housebound. But I'll let them make their comment. But I think at the end of the next fiscal, there'll be a better handle on what the loss in revenue was and what the uptake was. But there was certainly some loss in revenue at a retail level, and there was some loss of revenue on additional expenses and things like providing hand sanitizer, PPE to employees. So anyway, I'll let.
Yeah, maybe. Do I need to push the button? I could just expand a little bit.
If you miss it, she'll turn it on.
Oh, you've got me. Thank you. So I just to expand a little bit on what the minister said, it's bang on. What we're seeing is, in addition to the kind of the overt things that we did to try and help our customers, like waiving data overages and adding TV channels and waiving some of the internet charges, the impacts, the actual impacts of this is yet to be determined for us. But some of the things that we are seeing is that customers, of course, when we waived the data overcharges, customers then started to play with their own plans in terms of maybe reducing from an expensive plan down to a cheaper plan. Just to give you a sense, because there's no data overage, whether they were paying for a $40 plan or a $90 plan. So we saw
Hugh that did that?
we didn't see Hugh specifically, but so there, there's lots of that type of behavior that's gone on that impacts us that you wouldn't think about in the first instance. There's also some things like the arrangement that we have with our partner, our network reciprocity agreement. We share the costs of our network based on the amount of roaming that goes on. So the percentage of, say, Bell's customers that are on our network dictates how much of the operating costs they pay. And so there'll be some implications there when that all kind of is figured out. So there's a few larger things like that that have yet to come, and what that will actually look like. They'll be significant, I can tell you that. The actual amounts, I think all of the carriers are having a very difficult time trying to predict what the actual impact is going to be of the pandemic.
Is there any anticipation as to when that price tag might be sort of tallied up, either in an interim or a more complete sort of way?
Well, we are working on it as we speak. Some of the things won't even come to fruition until, say, September, when the deferral program is done. Then we'll be able to get a better sense of how many customers are actually sticking around, how many of them just aren't paying their bills but will pay after September versus how many are going bankrupt. So some of those types of things are hard to forecast right now. We'll start to narrow in on it, I would say, over the course of the next few months, and it'll be a fairly rough estimate for a couple months, and then I think we should have a pretty good handle, say in 2 or 3 months, something like that.
Are you anticipating a need to come back for further supplementary estimates, or will you be able to handle that on existing borrowing capacity, or how's that going to be?
We do not anticipate needing to come back for additional capital. Our plans will be to look for ways to right-size the organization and stay within the capital that's been approved.
You'll forgive me, I hear the words right size, and I want to hear more. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's really about controlling costs, understanding what our revenues will allow us to do. So by right sizing, we continue to do right sizing on an ongoing basis. We have for a number of years, based on what technology is doing and what our revenue is doing. It would just be more of the same, except in this instance, I think we're going to have to take a long, hard look at discretionary costs and managing those fairly tight-fistedly for the next little bit, at least till we have a very good understanding of kind of where we're going to be at when all the dust settles.
In terms of the range of measures undertaken by the company in response to COVID, other jurisdictions, I think TELUS had been offering free internet for low-income customers. Was there any particular rationale behind the measures that were taken by the corporation, and both in relation to cost and into efficacy? Was there a broader menu of options that you were considering, and why were the ones that were settled upon?
Yeah, a great question. I can tell you that I personally had discussions with the presidents of the other large companies. Never once was it about kind of, have you got any other ideas for us? It was more about, okay, you're doing the exact same thing that we are doing. And the way we as an executive approached it was we wanted to make sure that we were doing those things that needed to be done to help to protect the most vulnerable in the community. And so we thought that some of the things that would do that would be ensuring that they had affordable internet, ensuring that their cell bills were what they had contracted for. So we did things like we capped our data overages on our cell phones. I can tell you Bell and TELUS did not do that. We always have had no data overages on our landline internet. Bell and TELUS took the step of putting that in place. We added a number of free channels to make sure that the entertainment value was there for kids that had to stay at home. We took a lot of steps to reinforce our network to ensure that as the high demand for our services left the core downtown and moved out into residential areas, that our network could handle that shift in load. So we actually did work with TELUS in particular to borrow some of their spectrum on a short-term basis to be able to cover some of those shifts. So we did work together a little bit from that perspective. But the main thinking in our case was that we view SaskTel as having a role in ensuring that essential services are there and are up, and that was, you know, our three primary focuses were the safety of our employees, the safety of our customers, and providing essential services. That was really our mantra, and that's what we were focused on.
The minister had referenced certainly the retail impacts of the COVID. Could the minister or officials describe how that worked its way through the company's operations and where we're at right now and what the future might hold? But in terms of, I think of the store in the Cornwall Centre, for example, and how that is.
Understand how it evolved to and now where we're going?
And again, time is always so scarce and precious. Feel free to give me the high level treatment, but how did that evolve?
Sure. Well, the retail component, which is primarily our stores and our what we call them our customer service technicians, the folks that are out in people's homes. Those are the two customer-facing groups that we were very focused on initially, and again, we were focused primarily from the perspective of protecting our employees and protecting our customers. So on the store basis, we moved relatively quickly to reducing first the number of people in the store at a time. We had questionnaires up front that we would ask, have you traveled recently? Are you sick? Anyone in your household sick? Those types of things. And then we moved from that to closing the doors of the store physically, but not closing the store. So you needed an appointment for a period of time to be able to get things done, and you could book that online, or you could come to the store and book it. Again, just to control the flow of traffic, make sure that we could get things done. And we also moved a fair bit to trying to help people self-diagnose and self-correct the problems. So that was going on in the stores, and it was going on in a big way with our operations folks. So the people who would typically go into the homes, we quickly reduced the number of services that we would provide in a home to those that we thought were absolutely essential. So if your service was out, that was essential. If you needed an extra max set-top box, that was not essential. And so we ceased doing the in-home non-essential work, although we were prepared to, in many instances, drop off the equipment on the doorstep and then walk the customers through it if they were willing to do that. And so we did that for a period of time. As things have now opened back up, we have just recently now completely eliminated that. We still have in place the personal protective equipment as necessary. So anytime you can't socially distance, the folks use personal protective equipment. And or if the customer feels more comfortable that we do that, we do that. So today we are back up and running completely in terms of external installs. One of the things that we did stop doing, as you know, we have a very large fiber install program ongoing. So for a period of time, we stopped our conversions from DSL to fiber, just believing that if it's just about essential services, they've got internet. The other is an improved internet, but that's not essential. So it will put us behind, for example, in that program for a period of time, but we're now back up and running with those types of services. So things kind of went down like that and have now started to open up. In terms of bringing people back in these locations, we now have increased personal protection, increased distancing, virtually the same things you see just about everywhere else. Our employees, some of them are a little hesitant to come back. I think we've taught them well, stay at home, stay safe, and we're now trying to encourage them to understand we can do the best at keeping you safe at work, and that's our focus.
So in terms of that division between remote work and people in the different offices and operations of SaskTel, I guess when this thing was at its height, was what percentage of SaskTel's workforce was working remotely? What was on site? And were there any layoffs that came in the course of these past months?
So we very quickly moved within a couple weeks of this really starting to take off to having most of our employees work at home. And actually, I'm quite proud of this, so I'll share it with you. We ultimately had 90% of our workforce working at home. The other 10%, a large chunk of those are folks that work remotely anyway, like our CSTs, for example. In order to do that, we deployed close to 1,000 additional laptops. And we did that in the course of 2 weeks. So we were able to get, as I say, 90% of our folks working at home, and we believe very productively. So there are some groups that you can measure almost to the second. Our call center folks, you can tell what they're doing just about every minute. And so we know that they were as productive, and in some instances more productive than in the office, which is surprising. We also could manage the number of projects that we're working on in the various stages, and those two continued to be on target and or ahead of target. So our folks, 90% were at home. I'd say the vast majority were as productive at home. We tried to educate managers in techniques to stay in contact with their folks, and I think we've done a fairly good job of that. To the other point, have we laid anyone off, or has anyone? We actually made a very conscious decision that we weren't doing that, at least unless it became absolutely necessary, which it did not. Our call volumes did drop off, and we did have a very serious debate about whether or not we should be reducing the hours of our part-time folks. I think the call demand would have permitted that. We decided, kind of in the same vein as wanting to make sure that we were looking after the most vulnerable people, that maybe was not the appropriate thing, and if we could, we would find other meaningful work for them to do, and that's what we did. So we opted to try and fill up their plate with other things that we hadn't gotten to, and so as a result, nobody was laid off, and except in the very normal course of business, hours generally were not changed with a view to reducing hours.
Thanks for that, and good to hear. I guess another sort of aspect of the company keeping its obligations whole through this time, certainly SaskTel is a great corporate citizen in the province, has a number of charitable endeavors on display throughout the province, and the mind does sort of wonder about in terms of the different title sponsor or name sponsor agreements that the corporation has throughout the province in with various organizations, with various entities that are essentially, dark and will be for some time to come. What sort of impact has there been had with the corporation in that regard? Is there some sort of force majeure clause in your different contracts, or are you carrying those through? And are there any sort of financial implications that aren't plain?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Maybe I can brag about one thing and then more directly answer your question. So I'm very proud to be able to say that during this, we did come to the conclusion that we probably wouldn't spend as much on some of our proactive advertising as we might otherwise in a normal period of time. And so we did make the decision to donate $25,000 to the food bank and did that. So I think that was just a point of pride for the entire organization. More to your question, which is, what are we doing with our sponsorships in those situations where events have been canceled along that lines? So we have had numerous discussions, and Darcy can jump in anytime because Darcy actually has this portfolio, but I can tell you that we had active discussions about this. Our philosophy on this is that those sponsorships were there in the first place to try and assist volunteer organizations and small community groups that very much need the assistance. Some of them had already spent or had budgeted to spend some of the money that was earmarked to come from us. And so we adopted an approach that we would work with each of those organizations to best understand, one, is there a way to defer the benefit that they maybe couldn't produce this year because they weren't holding an event to the next time they hold the event? And or is there an alternative event? Because some groups like SJHL and other organizations have held virtual events. Evraz, I think, has is it the drive-in thing? Right. So we've worked with those kind of groups to say, okay, it's not what we signed up for, but let's see if we can make that work and still be able to provide support to the community and to the initial objective that was built around. So to date, we have not clawed back any of the sponsorships. We have deferred and or renegotiated kind of the benefit that we were looking for. And I think that it's actually provided some significant goodwill within the various communities to allow them. It would simply have just compounded the hardships that they were experiencing, and so that's how we've dealt with it. And I can tell you, we're continuing to work through some of them, but that's our approach.
Well, I tell you, my colleagues are going to start to think I'm some kind of like self-centered homer, but I'm glad particularly to hear that about Evraz, because and not only is it a Regina institution and a Regina serving organization, but certainly southern Saskatchewan as a whole, I think, has an interest in the well-being of a place like Evraz. And they're going through some very hard times right now. So the more sort of certainty and things that they can count on, I know the easier the situation gets. So I'm very glad to hear that. And not just because it's the largest single employer in my constituency. So anyway, good to hear that.
We're very pleased to do it, and Darcy probably can tell you all of the stories. But I think you'll find that just about every one of the associations that she's worked with, who have heard that we're not looking to get that money back, has breathed a collective sigh of relief. So I think it bodes well for our reputation as well in the future.
Okay. So good to hear all these things. And I guess with the expanded, or with the capital program at hand, is that an expansion or is that an acceleration of existing plans?
Our capital program?
If you take my meaning, are you adding things into the capital plan? And you've got more cash on hand to, as per the booster shot and all of that. And maybe this would be a great time for the minister to explain the booster shot to me, because I'm still not sure I understand that entirely.
The booster thing is something that will help all kinds of communities, all kinds of municipal infrastructure, and will help the province greatly. None of the money in the booster shot will affect this particular crown. So they had an existing capital program that had been in place, a multi-year program. This year, they've added significantly more, but prior to the pandemic, they've added significantly more so they could do additional rural wireless. There was a lot of concern about people wanting more cell phone coverage, wanting more bandwidth when there was coverage. So we've added a significant number of towers across the province.
Okay. I guess in that regard, as committee members, we were provided an interesting survey that had been conducted by the Agricultural Producers Association of Saskatchewan, and had some interesting aspects to that. But in terms of the APAS out of range report, they registered 75% dissatisfaction with internet service. Now, and again, now that we've gone through all the, complimenting the corporation and all the great work, let's get into how it can get even better. But 75% dissatisfaction with internet service, 68% dissatisfaction with mobile service, nearly 2/3 reporting daily disruption of mobile and/or internet service, and there's a number of other concerns registered. Does the minister or officials have anything they'd like to say in response to that?
I'll let the officials comment on it. I take some exception to sort of how they've done their calculations or whatever. The goal of SaskTel has been to maximize the benefit of every tower, every device that they have. So they look at the number of subscribers that would be benefited by a new tower. So I would suggest to them that we have some of the best coverage in Canada. We have in places, Alberta, Winnipeg, where the carriers will focus on the densely populated areas where you put up a tower or you add something else, and you've got a lot of subscribers that are directly benefited. In our province, we're very thinly populated across the province. We have people in the north, and we've got people in rural Saskatchewan where you add a new tower and there's only a minimal number of people that are affected by it. So the goal of SaskTel has been to identify the main routes and thoroughfares through there, and any reasonable sized community that would be appropriate to try and add on. So that's why they have added on the additional communities in addition to that was there. But there's still large areas where it's a rural area, the southwest corner of the province, where it's large ranch land, and it does not pay to put up a tower where there is 0 people that live in the area. But if you drive through the area on a grid road, you will not have coverage on that. So you focus on where the people are. So I think we'll reach out to APAS, try and arrange a meeting and try and have some discussions with them. But we focused on trying to look at where people are and where we can best try and provide safety and security. These are. I'm just going to read these quickly. In the far north, which is an area that's even more thinly populated, but we have added or have towers. 2 at Beauville, Black Lake, Brabant Lake, 2 in Buffalo Narrows, Canoe Narrows, Cigar Lake Mine, Coal Bay, Collins Bay, Point Denair Beach, Deschambault, Dillon, Far Indian Reserve, Fond du Lac, Green Lake, 2, Isla Lacrosse, 2, Key Lake, La Loche, 2, La Ronge, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in La Ronge, McCarthy River, McLean Lake, Mississippi, Molinoosa, Montreal Lake West, Pachinak, Pelican Narrows, Pine House, Sandy Bay, South End, Stanley Mission, Stony Rapids, Sucker River, Thunder Hills, Weaquin South, Wollaston Lake, 2. So that the idea is to try and provide some coverage so that if a person has to travel a distance to get coverage, they're not traveling for 2 hours to get it. But even with that number of them, with the size of the northern half of the province, I can't say that if you're at point X that you will necessarily have coverage, but our goal is to try and provide more and more better coverage all the time. So that's the recent additions to the sites. And each one of those sites is called a macro tower, which has got a coverage of what 25 miles for a macro tower?
Yeah, about 20, yeah.
So, around those towers, there's relatively good. So if there's a community there, we've tried to add the towers so that it directly does it. So APAS, we'll like to sit down with them and say, okay, this is where we have coverage, this is where we don't have coverage, and possibly make some changes to try and give some assistance to the people that are affected by it. But if they've asked somebody that's in an area that's not near a tower and not near where a tower is going to be because there's no community, they're not going to have either any coverage or satisfactory coverage. You focus on where the people are. If we tried to do a total blanket of the province, so you had 100% coverage, the cost would be in the billions and billions of dollars. So anyway, I'll let Doug answer a little bit more specifically. Sorry, I didn't mean to sound defensive.
No, you nicely described the social mandate of SaskTel, which, is why it's consistently popular with the people of Saskatchewan, despite the, when we went into deregulation and all. So, thanks.
You're exactly right. It's a utility that usually makes typically $100 million a year for the province, but could make more. But we treat it not just as a profit center. It is and should be, because it's owned by all of the people there. We treat it as a social utility and not worrying about every item or everything turning a profit. We try and make it so that there's a reasonable balance where we're giving as good services as they can.
Maybe I could just add a little bit to the, I think the minister's done a great job of describing.
Your best lines.
He might have.
But,
I have some others.
Ministers.
We're both lawyers, so you can expect more.
We'll play off each other. The APAS report, if I could, I'd say that there are a couple things that we agree with, but there is some facts in there that we question. So we too, I think, acknowledge that good internet and good cellular coverage is becoming more and more critical to all of the residents, business and consumer customers in the province. And that rural coverage is not as good, obviously, and there are lots of areas where it needs to be improved. For us, as the minister described, it is very much a balancing act between what it is that we can do that has some inkling of a financial return, and that is purely done on a social basis. And if you were going to cover the entire province, say just to give everybody ubiquitous type cellular coverage, we think that's about $1 billion. If we were going to try and give everybody in this province fiber service, say like we do in the city, that's somewhere between $5 and $10 billion. Neither of those things are on realistically, at least from a pure viability perspective. So somewhere in the middle, we try to find what are the worst served areas that we can still afford to go and improve. And by the way, we are not the only internet service providers in rural Saskatchewan. There are a number of them. More and more, we are working hard with those folks to try and find a way to help them supplement their business case. They too have the exact same problem that we do, which is how do you do this viably and provide service? There's not enough people. The cost outweighs the revenues that you can generate. So So we're working with them to see if there's a way that we might supplement their business case, possibly by providing backhaul, maybe a little bit of capital up front, those types of initiatives. We're really just still trying to find our way, I would say, in working with those folks. The one thing that troubled me a little bit about this report is the suggestion that folks were on a large number of folks were having, one or two or more than two issues with their technology a day. That is not our network. That is not our network. I can tell you that our network reliability is much higher than that. We do not have a network that is going down, 1 and 2 times a day. So for me, those have to be comments about somebody else's service or just a very disgruntled customer that, maybe is exaggerating the problems they're having as a way of making a point. So our network functionality is far superior to what is being described in that report. Doesn't change the fact that service in some of those locations desperately needs to be improved. We agree with that. To give you a sense of how we are trying to balance that $5 to $10 billion nut or $1 billion nut with cellular, we're spending $80 million dedicated to rural improvements this year out of our budget. We'll spend $1.25–1.4 billion over the next 5 years on improving our network. They're huge numbers. And SaskTel has something in the order of about 900 cell towers. Our next largest competitor, which is Rogers, has about 125. Rogers is building their network entirely based on where it's economically feasible to do so. So the fact that we have 900 towers, the minister, I think, mentioned the far north, where we have something close to 50 towers. In just the north, excluding the far north, the north kind of in around PA, those locations, kind of the COVID map, that north, we have close to 175 towers. That's more than what Rogers has in the entire province, let alone in the urban cities. So that's the constant balancing act that we have going on. We are constantly trying to improve. That's the cellular side of the business. We're constantly trying to improve the high speed, the wireline side of the business. So we have 2 or 3 different technologies that we use. There's copper, there's the old copper network still. That provides service out to something like about 450 communities. We have this year moved the speeds of, I think, about 300 or 350 of those communities from a maximum of 25 to 50 megabits per second, doubled the speed in about 300 communities. So we're continually trying to improve the service in those locations. We built out, we've added the Fusion network, which is kind of a hybrid mobile and fixed network, and we are looking at whether or not there's some additional expansion there. We are, this year, over the last couple of years, in fact, we put 100 towers up in smaller communities, cell towers in smaller communities around the province, 105 actually. We added 34 Fusion towers, and we're adding another 15 towers, $1 million a pop, 15 additional large towers just in rural municipalities, not necessarily in the communities, but in those areas that we think are the most underserved. So there's lots of work going on, I guess is my point. And I would say far and away significantly more work than anybody that is focused primarily from a bottom line perspective.
Well, and you're preaching to the choir on that one. But and also the minister didn't come near to stealing all your good material, so that's nice. But if you could, perhaps, I appreciate that you're undertaking to meet with APAS to discuss the report, and I think that's a great thing. If you make or perhaps if you could, that report was provided to members of the Crown and Central Agency Committee, and if you could undertake to, if there's a formal response made to APAS's survey, to also provide it to the members of the Crown and Central Agencies Committee, and that would be much appreciated.
If there's a formal response made, we'll let you know. Our intention would be to ask the officials to meet with them and sort of work through some of the things and trying to get a better defined path forward. But if we decide we want to do something, given that they made their report made public, we may want to do something. I don't really have an appetite to do a formal rebuttal, but I think it's worthwhile to have the discussion with them. So if there is something done formally, we'll certainly make sure you get it.
I see Molly taking your notes, so I'll be looking to the response. Mr. Minister, if you could inform the committee what's the state of affairs with Huawei and their potential involvement with the 5G network. It's another installment in a long-running conversation that you and I have been having low these years. What's the latest on this conversation, Mr. Minister?
I'll try and give you the condensed version. As you're likely aware, the current cell phone network we have across the province is a 4G network, a fourth generation network. The products that are in that network, both on top of the tower and the radio equipment at the bottom, are Huawei equipment, almost exclusively across the province. The product is competitively priced, works well, and is highly interoperable with the equipment used by Bell and TELUS. So an Ontario customer of Bell traveling across Western Canada will travel seamlessly as they roam into the Saskatchewan network. The same with a Saskatchewan customer that's traveling in Eastern Canada. Their phone will work flawlessly as it should. There'll be no issues as they travel. And we've looked forward as to what we might do in the future. So I think this is where the answer to your question comes. Our partners, Bell and TELUS, are moving towards the fifth generation or 5G network. Our Crown Co. will have to do the same thing here. We are expected to, and our contractual agreements with them require us to do the same as with our customer base here. We were looking for some direction from the federal government as to what use we would make of Huawei equipment. The federal government has declined to weigh in or give us a direction for or against it. However, given the international situations, Bell and TELUS are indicating publicly that they are moving away from using Huawei on their core network for a variety of reasons. If they choose to do that, that will have to be a decision here. So the likelihood here is that we would not use Huawei for any of the core network for 5G. That would be the likely scenario that would take place. At the present time, SaskTel is going through tests of a variety of different types of equipment, not publicly operable, but wanting to determine interoperability, what would happen if you went from a Huawei-served area to an Ericsson-served area, the coverage, the bandwidth, the variety of different things. So they're testing equipment from a number of different suppliers so that they will be in a position sometime later this year to make an announcement as to who their chosen carrier is. I've been public when I've done media in the past few months. I think I've done media a couple of times that although we're well served by the Huawei equipment on the 4G network, it would be highly unlikely that we would use it for the core 5G.
Does the minister have any sort of price tag in mind in terms of what these, you decide to go Ericsson, here's what 5G costs?
The 5G equipment would have to be purchased and installed. The existing 4G towers would not be used for an add-on of 5G on top of the same tower with the 4G. But in all likelihood, that wouldn't happen in any event outside of the major centers. 5G The signal does not travel very far. It's designed for densely populated areas, high profit for SaskTel, but not suitable for large rural areas where you're trying to get the maximum coverage between towers. So an equipment on a tower typically has a lifespan of 4 to 6 years. So the equipment that's around the province right now would likely run out its lifespan or would be phased out over time. The equipment that is in Saskatoon and Regina that is Huawei 4G equipment, some of it will have to be taken down. That equipment would be repurposed and moved elsewhere in the province. So the cost of bringing in new 5G equipment is a significant equipment, but no matter whether it's Huawei, Nokia, or Ericsson, or whoever it is, that equipment is going to be incurred in any event. But there will certainly be some cost to remove, relocate, and a change in a carrier is something that is expensive to go through, but we're going to do that.
So maybe to ask the question a bit of a different way, in terms of, sunk costs, what's going to be, is there anything that's going to be marooned out there when we decide not to utilize Huawei?
As in a stranded asset, we expect not to have that happen. The idea is that we would change things in blocks and would move things out of it. The additional cost that we wouldn't have had we not made this decision would be the cost in taking down the equipment in the cities and moving that equipment out to relocating it somewhere else. The towers that they've been using for the last while are a universal type of tower, so the tower would be able to be reused with any manufacturer's equipment on it. The land that the tower is on, of course, would continue, as well as the electricity to the tower and the fiber to the tower. So those things don't change, but the equipment at the bottom and on the top of the tower would get changed from Huawei equipment to another product.
Has the minister or officials received briefings from any, like the Canadian Security Intelligence, CSIS? Has the minister or officials received any sort of security briefings outlining concerns about using Huawei in the 5G network?
No, we haven't. We've actually, to the contrary, we've gone to when Minister Goodale was a federal minister. He was our Saskatchewan contact, and we went to him and said, we need some guidance and we need some direction. We're hoping that you'll make a ruling on it or give us some indication as to where you recommend that we go. I understand that it would be similar for Bell and Telus, so there was a lack of direction from anything. So we also tried contacting RCMP and whatever. We didn't receive any direction to or not to use the product, or that the product was at any particular risk.
Okay. Does the minister have a timeline, a more precise timeline in mind in terms of when this decision will be finally made? I appreciate you've foreshadowed and, all this, but
I think given that we're
when can we look for an announcement, Mr.
we're in an election year, so we tried. The direction that I gave the officials was, I don't want to play around or look like we're trying to stall this till after the election. I'm gonna put it out now that we're looking at making a change. I would rather have that out now than have somebody say we tried to conceal it or something. So we put it out now. I'm not sure what the timeline. It'll be over the next number of months for the testing to do, and depending on what the testing produces, I don't have an accurate timeline or an exact timeline. I'm expecting it'll be this calendar year sometime, but
Yeah, it's a long process. If I could just add, it's a very long process to select a new vendor. This is our largest network, and a part of the hesitation in giving you a definitive answer is it partly depends on the extent to which we can work with our partners. So Bell and Telus have both done some extensive equipment evaluation and negotiation with all of the major vendors. And depending on the extent to which they can and are willing to share their evaluation and their pricing with us, we could virtually short circuit that to a few months. Without it, our CTO will tell me that it's somewhere between 12 and 18 months before you might get a new network going. So we've had the discussion, that's not acceptable, but just to give you a sense, it's not a short period, and there are a few factors that will impact it significantly.
CTO is term Chief Technical Officer. The direction we have to take right now is following the lead of Bell and TELUS. If they've made the announcement that they're making the shift, so we have to follow suit. We rely on them for training, acquiring equipment, and a variety of other issues that we need to work lockstep with them. So if we chose to go a different direction than they did, it would certainly be problematic over the next number of years. So when we're 3% of the population, we look to them as major partners.
One last question. Certainly the company's been through an awful lot in the past year. Between the strike and between COVID, it's bound to pose some questions about how's morale doing with the men and women who do the very important work we have for them in SaskTel.
I'm going to let him speak directly to the people that are frontline workers, but the ones that I've met are some of the most outstanding, committed, hardworking people, and whether they're in scope, out of scope, they are an incredible group of people. So whether you go into a retail outlet, whether you've got somebody at your house because you clutched it up like I did, these people are phenomenal, true believers in the corporation. And I think they took this year with the things that took place and regarded that as an optimistic challenge and wanted to work their way through it. And to them, I commend and thank them. As the pandemic started, we had a number of them working around the clock, setting up the 811 lines and going back and forth with eHealth to say, oh no, we need this service, we need that service. And I was amazed. And to them, I can only say thank you so much. And since that time, they've been having to work in the field layered up with PPE and stuff like that. So I think the morale is probably better than ever because they've been challenged like never before. And to them, I can only say thank you and how much we appreciate them. But I'll let...
I just would echo what the minister said. I think the folks at SaskTel probably perform best when you put a challenge in front of them. And I am extremely proud of how they have reacted to the challenge. I can tell you on a daily basis, we get compliment after compliment after compliment from people who appreciate the extra mile that people have gone to deliver service, particularly in the height of the pandemic. We're starting to get some complaints now back to typically, where service isn't quite what they want. But the folks, I'd love to have taken a survey of what morale was like, say at the height of the pandemic, because I think people were extremely proud of how quickly they were able to reorganize their teams at home. I think they took pride in the fact that they could be equally productive, if not better productive at home. We have held constant management and all employee videos and conference calls and shared many of the stories with them. And I do believe that the morale in the company is probably at an all-time high right now. I expect that will probably come down a little bit as we start to ask folks and insist on folks coming back to work. As I say, we've trained them pretty well to stay at home and be productive, and now bringing them back, there's some trepidation for sure. So I would say morale's probably here and probably starting to float down just a little bit as we start to return back, because people are genuinely afraid that this isn't over, and are we taking appropriate safety precautions, which I think we are, but you don't know that till you get out of your house and you come back to the office and we iron things out.
Well, seeing Mr. Chair about to get his gaff out from under the desk and send me on my way. Thanks very much, Mr. Minister, officials, for the consideration of these estimates for SaskTel. And thanks through you to all the men and women of SaskTel, the great work that they do for the people of Saskatchewan.
Well, thank you. We will now conclude our consideration of Saskatchewan Telecommunication Holding Corporation. 2020-2021 mean estimates. Vote 153, Saskatchewan Telecommunications Holding Corporation, statutory. Loans subvote ST01 in the amount of $339,900,000. There is no vote, as this is statutory. And 2019-2020 supplementary estimates, vote 153, Saskatchewan Telecommunications Holding Corporation, statutory. Loans subvote ST01 in the amount of $25,300,000. There is no vote, as this is statutory. Do you have any closing comments, Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank the people on the committee that are here tonight for their time. Would specifically like to thank the building people from Ledge Assembly Services, Hansard Security, Broadcast Services, and the people that work in the building. I want to thank as well the officials from SaskTel, not just for being here tonight, but for the good work that they've done throughout the year. It's not often that I get to work with a CEO that's another lawyer that I feel is somebody I can truly relate to and bond with. So I say that for the benefit of his staff so they know that we will gang up on them should we have to. They did, I think, incredible work through the pandemic and through some challenging times, and I want to thank the member opposite for having raised the issues and given the opportunity to thank them. I know this is the last time that I'll have the member opposite, Warren, in committee, and I want to thank him and wish him the very best as he goes forward. He's one of the truly classy people in this building, somebody I regard as a good colleague and a good friend. I remember when we gave him 2 schools in one day in his constituency, and he actually teared up when he came over to thank me. To me, he is the epitome of what an MLA should be, setting aside all the partisan and political difference. He's one of the best. So, Warren, to you, all the best.
Well, thank you, Minister. And we will now recess until 6 o'clock.